The air in the grand ballroom felt heavy and cold, even though the room was filled with hundreds of people. I stood in the shadows near the kitchen door, my hands trembling slightly against my white apron. I was a maid, invisible to the rich and powerful people laughing under the crystal chandeliers. My only focus was my 7-year-old daughter, Sable. She was standing by a pillar, wearing a simple dress I had sewn for her. She looked like a tiny bird in a room full of peacocks. Then the music stopped. Lucan, the billionaire owner of the estate, walked down the marble staircase. He was tall, wearing a suit that cost more than I made in a year. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on Sable. He didn't see a child, he saw an eyesore. He walked straight toward her and the crowd went silent. "What is this?" Lucan asked, his voice booming through the hall. He pointed a finger at Sable. "I don't remember inviting the help's offspring to a gala of this caliber." Sable looked up at him, her eyes wide with fear. I was just waiting for my mommy," she whispered. Lucan let out a harsh, cold laugh. "Waiting? You don't belong here, look at you. You are common, you are a nobody. People like you are just stains on the floor of a place like this." He looked around at his guests, who began to chuckle uncomfortably. "She's worthless, just like the dirt she comes from." My heart didn't just break, it shattered. Seeing my daughter shrink and pull her shoulders in, trying to become invisible, made my blood boil. I wanted to run out and scream, but I was just a maid. I felt a tight, burning sensation in my chest. My name is Della, and in that moment of pure humiliation, I made a silent vow. I watched Lucan sneer at my crying child one last time before turning away. He thought he was a king, but he didn't realize that he had just started a war he wasn't prepared to win. I whispered to myself that no one would ever disrespect my child again. The fire in my soul was lit, and it would burn his empire to the ground. That night, the house was finally quiet. The guests had gone home to their mansions, and Lucan was likely asleep in his gold-trimmed bed. I sat on the edge of the small cot in our tiny room in the servants' quarters. Sable was finally asleep, though her eyelashes were still wet from the tears she had cried earlier. I reached out and gently stroked her hair, my heart aching with a mix of love and fury. As I tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, her head tilted slightly. In the soft glow of the moonlight coming through the small window, I saw it. It was a faint, distinct mark on the side of her neck, right below the hairline. It was shaped like a small, intricate crown, a royal-shaped birthmark. I had seen it 1,000 times before, but tonight it looked different. It seemed to glow with a strange importance. Something inside me shifted. I remembered the stories my grandmother used to tell me about a lost lineage and a family that had been forced into hiding long ago. I had always thought they were just fairy tales to make a poor girl feel special. But looking at that mark now, after Lucan had called her common, I felt a jolt of electricity run through my veins. This mark was a secret. It was a piece of information that no one in this house, especially not Lucan, knew about. My mind began to race at 100 miles an hour. If this mark meant what I thought it meant, Sable wasn't just not common. She was more important than Lucan could ever dream of being. I realized then that Lucan's mocking words hadn't just hurt us. They had given me a reason to look closer at who we actually were. I didn't just want an apology anymore. I wanted justice. I stayed up for hours, watching my daughter breathe, realizing that the key to our future was hidden in plain sight on her skin. Lucan thought he was the master of the world, but he was actually harboring a princess he had treated like trash. The game had changed, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I held the winning card. The next morning, I did my work like a ghost. I polished the silver and scrubbed the floors, but my mind was far away. As soon as I had a break, I didn't go to the cafeteria to eat. Instead, I went to the old library in the basement of the city, a place where no one would recognize me. I needed to know the truth. I spent hours poring through heavy, dusty books. I looked at historical records, genealogy reports, and old maps of kingdoms that didn't exist on modern maps anymore. My fingers trembled as I turned the pages of a book about the great crests of the Southern Isles. And there it was. An illustration of a birthmark passed down through a royal bloodline, the exact same crown-shaped mark that was on Sable's neck. According to the records, the lineage had vanished during a great upheaval decades ago. The survivors had disappeared into the world, living as commoners to stay safe. As I read the names, I saw my grandmother's maiden name. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't a fairy tale. Sable was the rightful heir to a legacy of incredible influence and history. My anger from the night before turned into a cold, sharp purpose. Lucan had spent years treating us like we were nothing more than the dust on his boots. He had mocked a child who had more nobility in her pinky finger than he had in his entire body. He thought he was destroying us, but his cruelty had actually planted the seeds of his own downfall. I closed the book firmly, the sound echoing in the quiet library. I wasn't just a maid anymore. I was a mother with a mission. I knew I couldn't just walk up to Lucan and tell him. He would laugh and throw us out on the street. I needed a plan. I needed to be patient. I needed to build a life that would allow Sable to reclaim what was hers. Strategy was my new language, and I was going to learn to speak it perfectly. Lucan's clock was ticking, and he didn't even know the time. A few weeks later, I managed to get a night off. I used my tiny bit of savings to buy a decent dress from a second-hand shop and attended a small charity event in the city. I didn't go to eat or drink. I went to observe. I needed to see how the world of the powerful actually worked from the outside. While I was standing near the back, watching the way people shook hands and exchanged business cards, an older man approached me. He had white hair and eyes that looked like they had seen everything. His name was Tavian. He wasn't loud or flashy like Lucan, but I noticed that when he spoke, everyone else stopped to listen. "You don't look like you're here for the champagne," Tavian said, leaning against a pillar near me. I looked at him, trying to keep my face calm. "I'm here to learn," I replied simply. We talked for an hour. I didn't tell him everything, but I told him I wanted to build a better life for my daughter and that I was looking for a way to break into the world of business. Tavian listened with a kind of focus I wasn't used to. He was a discreet but powerful investor, and for some reason, he saw something in me. "Justice is a rare thing in this world, Della," he said, his voice low. "Most people try to get it with anger, but true revenge, the kind that lasts, requires brains, not brute force. You need to be the person they never see coming." He offered to be my mentor. He didn't promise me money, but he promised me something better: knowledge. He told me he would teach me how to invest, how to talk to people of influence, and how to hide my intentions until the perfect moment. As I walked home that night, I felt a spark of hope. I was starting from zero, but I had a teacher. I realized that to take down a giant like Lucan, I had to become someone he couldn't ignore. I was ready to start my double life. By day, I was the maid he mocked. By night, I was a student of the world he thought he owned. Months turned into years, and I became a master of living two lives. During the day, I continued to work at Lucan's estate. I scrubbed his floors and polished the very marble stairs where he had once stood to humiliate my daughter. To him, I was still invisible, just a pair of hands that made his life comfortable. He frequently threw lavish parties, flaunting his immense wealth and laughing with his arrogant friends. He remained completely blind to the truth of Sable's heritage, never realizing that his cruel behavior had planted the seeds of his own undoing. I remember one specific gala where Lucan stood in the center of the room, bragging about a new acquisition. I was moving through the crowd with a tray of crystal glasses. He didn't even look at me as he reached for a drink, but he continued to make jokes about the lower classes to his guests. I kept my head down, but behind my eyes, I was studying everyone. Thanks to Tavian's mentorship, I now understood the complex web of influence in that room. I knew who was in debt, who was looking for a new partner, and who Lucan had secretly stepped on to get ahead. I even managed to attend a few of these high-profile events in the city as a guest, wearing disguises or blending in as a minor philanthropist. One night, Lucan actually walked past me at a charity auction. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I didn't flinch. I looked him right in the eye, offering a polite, distant smile. He didn't recognize me at all. To him, the woman in the elegant dress couldn't possibly be the woman who cleaned his toilets. I was a ghost in his world, a silent observer gathering every piece of information. I needed to eventually tear his life apart. As Sable grew older, the common girl Lucan had mocked began to transform into someone extraordinary. Even though we lived in a small apartment now, I made sure she had every resource I could afford through my secret investments. It wasn't just about school, it was about her spirit. Sable began to display a remarkable ability to learn. She could mimic foreign languages with perfect accents after hearing them only a few times, and she memorized complex royal protocols and history like she was born for it, which, of course, she was. I started introducing her to small, private gatherings of Tavian's trusted circle. These were people who valued intelligence over titles. They were deeply impressed by her poise and her sharp mind. One evening, an elderly diplomat watched her speak and whispered to me that she had the bearing of a queen. My pride grew quietly every time someone recognized her worth. It was the opposite of the shame Lucan had tried to force upon her. However, we still had to deal with Lucan's lingering presence. Occasionally, when I had to bring Sable to the estate because my childcare fell through, Lucan would see her. He hadn't forgotten his disdain. He saw her practicing her languages in the garden once and called it a pathetic parlor trick. He told his friends that the maid was trying to dress up a pig by giving her an education. He remained arrogant and blind, still calling her a nobody. Every time he opened his mouth to insult her, it only made my resolve stronger. He had no idea that the trick he was mocking was the very thing that would soon make him obsolete. The tension between my two worlds finally reached a breaking point one afternoon at the family estate. I was in the middle of organizing the library when Lucan stormed in, looking for a misplaced file. He was in a foul mood, his face red with anger. He saw me and immediately started shouting, accusing me of overstepping my boundaries because I had moved some of his important papers to clean the desk. "You are a maid, Della. Your job is to clean, not to think," he roared, slamming his hand on the mahogany table. "You think because you've worked here for years that you have some kind of say in how this house is run. You're lucky I haven't thrown you and that brat of yours out on the street yet." In the past, I would have looked at the floor and apologized. I would have trembled. But that day, I didn't. I stood my ground and looked him directly in the eyes. I didn't yell back. I simply held my ground calmly and smiled a small, knowing smile. I let his fury fester, watching him get more and more frustrated because he couldn't provoke a reaction out of me. "I understand my place, Lucan," I said quietly. My voice was steady, like a calm sea before a storm. He narrowed his eyes, confused by my lack of fear. He couldn't see that I was already moving steps ahead of him in a game he didn't even know we were playing. He thought he was winning a petty argument in a library, but I was winning the battle for our future. He walked away, still grumbling about my attitude, unaware that the woman he just insulted was the same woman who was slowly buying up the shares of his favorite tech partners. The time for waiting was almost over. Lucan was planning his biggest event yet, a high-profile gala to celebrate his 20 years in business. It was going to be filled with the most influential people in the country, including international investors and dignitaries. I knew this was the moment. This was the stage where I would execute my gala heist plan. I didn't plan to steal money or jewels. I planned to steal the one thing Lucan valued most, his reputation. The goal was simple but massive. I would attend the gala not as a maid, but as a high-level investor and philanthropist. I would reveal Sable to the world, demonstrating her incredible talent and grace, and in the process, Lucan would be publicly humiliated for his past cruelty. I spent weeks preparing. I secured a stunning, elegant gown for myself and an even more beautiful one for Sable, something that looked modern but carried hints of the royal heritage we had discovered. I refined every detail of our characters. I practiced our arrival in my head countless times, ensuring that every eye in the room would focus on us at the precise moment we walked through those doors. I even tested my disguise at a smaller event to make sure no one from the staff would recognize me. My heart was electric with anticipation. For years, I had been the one watching from the kitchen. Now, I was going to be the one commanding the room. The weeks leading up to the gala were filled with a different kind of work. I didn't just scrub floors. I began to plant seeds in the minds of the elite. Using the connections I had built through Tavian, I started to leak subtle hints about a mysterious heiress who would be attending Lucan's big night. I made sure the rumors were quiet but persistent. I wanted the people in Lucan's circle to be looking for someone new, someone important, before we even stepped out of the car. Gossip in that world spreads like wildfire. Soon, I heard the household staff whispering about the mystery guest. Even Lucan began to feel unsettled. He liked to be the center of attention, and the idea of someone else stealing his spotlight was clearly bothering him. He became more irritable, demanding perfection for the event, though he still had no idea why he felt so anxious. The tension was deliciously slow building. Every time I served him coffee, I saw the worry in the lines of his face. He was looking for an enemy in the shadows of the business world, never suspecting the woman standing right in front of him. I enjoyed the irony. He was a man who thought he knew everything, but he was completely blind to the fact that his own house was the staging ground for his social execution. The trap was set, and the bait was a story he had tried to bury years ago. One evening, just a few days before the gala, I sat down with Sable in our quiet apartment. The atmosphere was heavy with the importance of what we were about to do. I needed to make sure she was ready for the pressure. I looked her in the eyes and explained that patience and strategy were our only real weapons. "Sable," I said softly, "they will try to make you feel small again. Lucan will try to use his voice to drown yours out, but you have something he can never buy. You have the truth." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of anxiety and determination. She wasn't that crying little girl by the pillar anymore. She was a young woman who understood the weight of her name. We spent the night rehearsing everything. We practiced our protocols, the way she should stand, the way she should answer questions, and her reactions to the inevitable shock of the crowd. We prepared for the world to see the truth that had been hidden under her hair for so long. I watched her practice her royal posture, and for a moment, I forgot we were in a cramped apartment. She looked like she belonged on a throne. We were no longer just a mother and daughter. We were a team preparing for the most important performance of our lives. Just when I thought the plan was perfect, a ghost from the past appeared. An old man named Evander contacted me through Tavian. He was a former royal advisor and a close friend of the family lineage Sable belonged to. Seeing him was like seeing a piece of history come to life. His eyes filled with tears when he saw the birthmark on Sable's neck. "It is true," he whispered, his voice trembling. "She is the one we thought was lost." He confirmed her heritage with documents and stories that matched everything I had researched, but he also gave me a stern warning. He knew Lucan's family and their history of ruthlessness. He warned me that if the revelation wasn't handled perfectly, Lucan would use his power to crush us before the world could even react. The stakes escalated instantly. This wasn't just about a social embarrassment anymore. It was about protecting Sable's right to her own life. The plan had to be flawless. One mistake, and Lucan would find a way to make us disappear. Evander agreed to help us, acting as the bridge between Sable and the international dignitaries who would be at the gala. Having him on our side gave us the legitimacy we needed, but it also meant there was no turning back. We were playing for keeps now. As the gala approached, Lucan's behavior became even more erratic. He began to suspect that something was happening, even if he couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. He was a man who lived on control, and he could feel it slipping away. He increased the surveillance on the estate and even hired private investigators to look into the new money moving into the local markets. I had to be more careful than ever. Every time I left the estate to meet with Tavian or Evander, I had to make sure I wasn't being followed. I took different routes home and used burner phones for all our communications. Every minor misstep, every slip of the tongue, could ruin years of preparation. My heart was constantly racing, but I kept my face like stone. I watched the private investigators come and go, reporting back to Lucan. They were looking for a corporate raider or a rival billionaire. They never thought to look at the maid who was currently dusting the frames of the security monitors. I was meticulous in every move I made. I made sure my financial trails were buried under layers of shell companies, and that Sable was hidden away in a safe location during the final days of prep. Lucan was looking for a monster at the gates, never realizing the gatekeeper had already betrayed him. The day of the gala finally arrived. I felt like a general preparing for the final charge. I had spent every last penny of my secret savings and investment returns to ensure this moment was undeniable. I secured the most elegant gown for Sable, a deep royal blue that made her eyes spark, with a high collar that could be moved at just the right second. For myself, I chose a gown of understated gold. I wanted to look like the wealth that doesn't need to shout. The anticipation in our small apartment was electric. As I helped Sable into her dress, I could see her hands shaking. "Remember," I whispered, "we aren't just going to a party. We are going to claim what they tried to take from you." I practiced our arrival strategy with her one last time. We had timed everything to the second: when to enter, where to stand, and how to ensure that every influential eye in that room would focus on us at the precise moment the music slowed. I looked at my daughter and saw a princess, not because of the dress, but because of the fire in her eyes. We had rehearsed our dialogue and our movements until they were second nature. I knew that tonight the world would see us, but more importantly, Lucan would see us. He would see the people he thought were beneath him standing at the very top of his world. I took a deep breath, checked the time, and signaled for the car. It was time to go. As the limousine pulled up to the long, winding driveway of the estate, I looked out the window. The lights of the mansion were blindingly bright, and the red carpet was packed with photographers and reporters. Just before we stepped out, a memory hit me like a physical blow. I remembered the gala years ago, the night Lucan stood on those same marble stairs and mocked Sable. I could still hear his voice echoing in my mind, calling her common and worthless. I remembered the way my heart had shattered as I watched my little girl shrink under his cruel words. That memory didn't make me sad anymore. It made me strong. My anger simmers just below the surface, but I reminded myself that tonight was about triumph, not just cruelty. This reflection steeled my resolve. I looked at Sable. She was sitting tall, her chin up, looking every bit the royal she was born to be. She didn't look like a victim anymore. She looked like a victor. "Are you ready?" I asked. She nodded, her face calm and determined. I realized then that my meticulously built plan wasn't just about getting back at a mean man. It was about showing my daughter that she was enough and that no one, not even a billionaire, had the power to define her worth. With that thought, I opened the door. We stepped out of the car, and the world seemed to freeze for a second. The camera flashes were like lightning, and the murmurs from the crowd rose into a dull roar. We walked up the red carpet with a grace that made people step back. As we entered the ballroom, I saw Lucan. He was standing near the center of the room, holding a glass of champagne, laughing with a group of investors. As we moved through the crowd, I saw his eyes flicker. He saw a familiar silhouette, but because of our elegant clothes and the way we carried ourselves, he couldn't quite place who we were. He looked confused, his brow furrowing as he tried to figure out why a mysterious heiress looked so much like the maid he usually ignored. Every whisper in the room carried tension. People were asking, "Who is she? And where did they come from?" I commanded the attention of the room without saying a word. I led Sable toward the center of the ballroom, right into the heart of Lucan's inner circle. I could feel his gaze on us, heavy and suspicious. He was a predator who sensed he was no longer the most dangerous person in the room. I didn't rush. I wanted him to feel the weight of our presence. I wanted him to wonder. The trap was fully open, and he was walking right into it, one confused step at a time. The atmosphere in the room was like a wire pulled too tight. Evander, our old mentor, was already in place, moving through the crowd of dignitaries and international guests. He began to subtly signal to the most influential people in the room, whispering about the arrival of the lost Lineage. He directed their attention toward Sable. Cameras began to focus on her as she leaned in to speak with a high-ranking official. At the perfect moment, according to our plan, she adjusted her hair, moving it away from her neck. The bright gala lights hit her skin, and there it was, the royal birthmark, clear and undeniable. A gasp rippled through the nearest group of guests. The influential dignitaries leaned in, their eyes wide with shock as they recognized the ancient mark. Lucan was only a few feet away. He saw the reaction of the crowd and followed their gaze. When he finally saw the mark on Sable's neck, he froze. I watched as recognition and then pure horror flashed across his face. The worthless girl he had mocked was standing there with the mark of a queen, surrounded by the very people Lucan had spent his whole life trying to impress. He looked at me, then back at her, his face turning a sickly shade of white. The reveal had begun, and there was absolutely nothing he could do to stop the truth from coming out. Lucan stood there, his face pale as a ghost, staring at the mark on Sable's neck. For a few seconds, the billionaire was speechless. Then, his arrogance tried to take over again. He let out a forced, shaky laugh that sounded hollow in the quiet room. He attempted to dismiss the revelation, calling out to the guests that it was all a scam. "It's a fake," he shouted, his voice cracking. It's just a birthmark, a coincidence. You're all being fooled by a maid and her brat." He tried to move toward us, his eyes wild, claiming it was all a trick to embarrass him. But as he spoke, the murmurs from the guests grew louder, and I could see the doubt in their eyes, not doubt of us, but of him. I didn't say a word. I simply maintained my composure, standing tall and calm. I let Sable take the lead. She didn't shrink away or cry like she had years ago. Instead, she stepped into the spotlight with a level of poise and dignity that made everyone in the room hold their breath. By trying to deny the truth so loudly, Lucan only made himself look desperate and small. The more he shouted, the more the world realized he was the one who had been wrong all along. The situation reached a boiling point when Lucan, losing his temper completely, marched over to Sable. He confronted her right in front of the international dignitaries and the high-ranking officials he had spent his career courting. He loomed over her, his face red with fury, demanding she tell the truth and admit she was just the daughter of a servant. I watched silently from a few feet away. My heart was pounding, but I knew this was the moment he would finally destroy his own reputation. He was showing the world the bully he truly was. Everyone watched as the powerful billionaire tried to intimidate a young woman in a room full of the world's most influential people. Sable didn't blink. She looked up at him and responded calmly, asserting her lineage with a quiet authority that silenced the entire room. "I know exactly who I am, Lucan," she said, her voice steady and clear. "The question is, do you know who you are now that your lies are gone?" The room let out a collective gasp. In that moment, the power shifted permanently. Lucan wasn't the master of the house anymore. He was just a rude man, making a scene at his own party. As the shock of the confrontation settled, the atmosphere in the ballroom changed. I watched as Lucan's own family members began to pull away from him, whispering to one another and looking at him with shame. They realized, perhaps for the first time, that he had completely underestimated Sable and the fire she carried. His arrogance had blinded him to the danger right under his roof. The shift was sudden and brutal. Former allies, people who had done business with Lucan for decades, began to literally turn their backs on him. They were intrigued by the young heiress and the story of her lost lineage. They saw the documents Evander was discreetly showing to the top officials, and they knew the tide had turned. Lucan stood in the middle of the floor, but he was suddenly very much alone. His arrogance had isolated him. People who had laughed at his jokes an hour ago were now moving towards Sable, offering their business cards and asking for an introduction. It was a social execution. He had built his life on being the most important person in the room, and in one night he had become the most avoided. His empire was made of sand, and the tide was finally coming in. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. Media coverage of the gala was relentless, and the influential whispers of the elite validated Sable's royal claim to the world. Pictures of the birthmark and the confrontation with Lucan were on the front page of every major news outlet. The Maid's daughter was now being called the hidden princess. I sat in our new office, watching the news reports. Lucan's reputation began crumbling faster than I could have imagined. His stock prices were dipping, and his partners were releasing statements distancing themselves from his unprofessional and discriminatory behavior. For years, I had dreamed of this moment, but seeing it happen felt different than I expected. I savored this moment, but I did it without gloating. We kept our dignity intact, refusing to give interviews or attack him in the press. We let the truth do the work for us. Sable sat across from me, looking through letters of support from people all over the world. We had won, not by being as mean as he was, but by being better. The justice we had sought for years was finally here, and it was even sweeter because we had stayed true to ourselves. Lucan did not go down without a fight. Desperate to regain control, he attempted to take legal action to discredit Sable. He hired a team of high-priced lawyers to claim that our documents were forged and that the birthmark was a medical enhancement. He tried to paint us as scammers who had spent years infiltrating his home to steal his fortune. It was his final, ugly attempt to crush the truth under the weight of his money. However, he had underestimated the power of the evidence we had gathered. The courts, influenced by the undeniable evidence of Sable's lineage and the historical documentation verified by Evander, dismissed his claims almost immediately. Experts in genealogy and royal history testified that the birthmark was a biological impossibility to forge and matched the ancient records perfectly. As the judge threw out his case, Lucan's power waned rapidly. The legal battle, which he had hoped would save him, only served to highlight his desperation. People saw that he was willing to use the law to bully a young woman out of her birthright. By the time he walked out of the courtroom, his remaining business partners had already sent him termination notices. He had tried to use his wealth as a sword, but it had finally turned into the very thing that cut him off from the world. In the quiet days that followed the court case, Sable and I spent a lot of time alone in our new home. We finally had the space to breathe and reflect on the years of injustice and humiliation we had endured. We talked about the nights we spent in that tiny servant's room and the way Lucan's laughter used to make us feel like we didn't exist. "Mom, did you always know we would get here?" Sable asked me one evening as we watched the sunset. I looked at her, seeing the strong, confident woman she had become. I told her that I didn't always know how we would get here, but I knew that the truth was too heavy to stay buried forever. Our bond strengthened during those quiet moments, and our resilience was celebrated privately. I realized that the victory wasn't just in the headlines or the bank accounts. It was in the fact that we could look at each other without fear. I knew the final moments of our transition were near, our strategy had been perfect, and the life we had dreamed of was no longer a dream. We had survived the storm, and we had come out on the other side with our souls intact. The true culmination of our journey happened at a second grand event, this one hosted by the international community to honor the restoration of the lost lineage. At this grand event, Sable was officially recognized as royalty by foreign dignitaries from across the globe. It was a night of pure elegance, but this time, there were no sneers or hidden rooms. Lucan was there, too, not as a host, but as a man who had been pushed to the edge by his own actions. He stood at the back of the room, watching as the girl he had once called a nobody received a standing ovation from the most powerful people on earth. He was humiliated, forced to witness the very moment his common maid's daughter became a global icon. Every insult he had ever given Sable now rebounded publicly. As the dignitaries spoke of her grace and her intelligence, the memory of Lucan's cruelty made him look like a monster in comparison. He tried to blend into the shadows, but there was nowhere for him to hide from the reality of his failure. The world was celebrating the very person he had tried to destroy, and the irony was a weight he could no longer carry. The aftermath for Lucan was total. His empire, once thought to be untouchable, faced extreme social and financial scrutiny. Without the support of his prestigious social circle, his businesses began to fail. Investors withdrew their support in droves, citing his lack of character as a risk to their brands. He was no longer the man everyone wanted to know. He was the man everyone wanted to forget. Even his family members, who had once stood by him out of fear or greed, began to openly criticize him in the press. They wanted to save their own reputations, so they painted him as a rogue element who had misled them for years. He was left alone in his massive, empty estate, surrounded by gold and marble that no longer meant anything. The arrogance that had fueled years of his cruelty now collapsed around him entirely. He had spent his life building a throne out of other people's misery, and now he was sitting on it alone. I heard that he rarely left his house, unable to face a world that now saw him for exactly what he was. He had lost his power, his friends, and his pride. He was a billionaire in name only, a king with no kingdom. Today, our lives look nothing like the ones we left behind. Sable has stepped confidently into her royal duties, using her platform to advocate for those who are overlooked by society. She travels the world, speaking with a voice that is both gentle and powerful. I have used my portion of our success to build a thriving philanthropic foundation in our name, focusing on education and support for workers who are treated as invisible. We often think back to that first gala, but the memory no longer hurts. It serves as a reminder of how far we have come. Lucan is powerless now, left with nothing but his own arrogance and deep regret. He is a shadow of the man he used to be, while we are living in the light. Justice was served with grace and intelligence. We proved that you don't have to be cruel to get revenge, you just have to be successful. We walked through the fire and came out as gold. As I watched Sable lead her new life with dignity and prosperity, I know that our triumph is firm and morally satisfying. Resilience and intelligence will always triumph over arrogance and entitlement. We are finally home.